Hello, everyone, and welcome back to This Week in Enterprise Tech. I'm Hyun Park from Amalgam Insights here with Charlie Araujo. How are you today, Charlie?
I am great. I'm talking to you. You can probably tell the setup looks a little bit different. As I think I probably mentioned here about 6 weeks ago, we moved apartments. Oh my God, this is such a big, long process.
Hmm.
And the last thing on the list was where I'm at now, which is what I call our multi-purpose room. So it's my office during the day, and early morning and nighttime, it's our gym. And so it had to be set up in a specific way. So I now have my big screen monitor that's been locked in storage for years is back up. You can't see it, but it's like this big. It's awesome.
Nice.
And I have a folding desk that now folds up. So it's mounted to the wall and folds down. And so I can pop it up when I'm working right now. And it's as a standing desk form. And I can drop it down. And then the space is now wide open to become our gym. So it's been a long time coming. And it's been a lot of work and a lot of holes in my wall that aren't supposed to be there that I had to kind of got it wrong. But
Sure.
I'm excited. So yeah, it's all about figuring out how to find the new balance and as things change and adapt. And that's actually sort of what we're talking about today a little bit because we had some interesting sort of news. It was kind of a slow news week, I would say.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
but the one that you brought up, and this is near and dear to your heart, so I'll let you do the whole setup. And I don't know if you're actually at the event, but there was FinOps X 2025, which is, I guess, a 2-day conference all about FinOps. And well, I have my opinion. I'll let you set it up first, but I find it interesting about how FinOps is not immune to this whole AI craze and the need to adapt towards it. And is that a good thing, or does it make sense, or is it inevitable? So why don't you walk us through and then we can chat about it.
Yeah, first of all, I was at the FinOps X conference last week, and I have to say, just from a personal perspective, FinOps has been a really exciting thing for me to watch because I've been covering technology lifecycle and technology expense management for 17 years, and the vast majority of that time, I've been trying to promote best practices across invoice management, payment management, uh, getting vendor relationships together, contracts, really getting and as well as technical strategy and trying to make this all comprehensive and something people can follow along with. I think FinOps has frankly done a fantastic job of structuring this in a way that thousands of cloud practitioners have been able to adopt. So kudos to them on that. Just had to give you your flowers as I am starting to leave the analyst space. But I think this FinOps X was an interesting conference this year because the cloud people who have successfully taken their $50 million in annual cloud spend and reduced it by, call it $10 million, are now being asked to take on other parts of the IT world, including software as a service and notably AI. Of course, everybody and their mother and father played with AI last year, and there were a lot of experiments. There were a lot of initial experiments, and now everybody's trying to figure out how to do this for real at an enterprise perspective and realizing if we don't get a hold of our costs now, this is something that can easily get out of hand quickly. They saw in these initial $100,000 POC proof of concepts that turned into $500,000 experiments without too much work, without too much effort. And now they're realizing, okay, now we have to figure out how to do the same thing from a modeling perspective and an AI cost perspective and an AI usage perspective. And that was really one of the main focus areas of the show this year. I would say last year there was a lot more focus on environmental and social governance issues. This year there's a lot of focus on AI.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been a fan of FinOps for a long time, and I've long advocated for the fact that it is really a codified set of principles that obviously very applicable directly to cloud because of cloud's sort of elastic nature and the variability of the cost structure. But at the end of the day, these are issues, the transparency and visibility into cost that has plagued IT forever. And so I've
Mhm.
long advocated to take these same principles and sort of deconstruct them and apply them much more broadly across the enterprise. And so in that regard, I'm encouraged. I am definitely encouraged to see for instance, they announced Focus 1.2, which is an increased effort to extend this into SaaS coverage and other areas. And so I think that's all really, really positive. The part that I struggle with a little bit the rise of AI and the pitch, particularly I guess on the day two, and I wasn't there, right? But was basically saying FinOps for AI, and the big message, the storyline was, hey, it's the same thing, it's just AI. And while I think if you're reductive enough, that's probably a true statement, in that the fundamental principles of create visibility so that you can see everything with clarity and therefore manage intentfully what your spend is and where you're allocating, and which was the fundamental problem with cloud originally, right? That we just didn't have that visibility. At that level, I certainly agree with it. I think what makes AI different is that we could anticipate, manage, and measure usage patterns around cloud, and they were relatively linear, they were relatively predictable. And so it was about discipline. It was about the need to create structure and a managed way of approaching it. I think what makes AI different is that there's no clarity right now about consumption models and pricing models. They're all over the place. Some are conversation-based, some are token-based, some are flat fee-based. So you don't have a universal principle even to apply it to, which you really do with cloud, right? So that's a fundamental difference. But I also think that AI is in such an early state of user adoption, of people using it, that drives that cost consumption, because and the cost consumption is in fact so potentially explosive around it, and not in the same way that you think about it from a cloud perspective. I think it's gonna be a lot harder. And so while I agree at a principle level, I would, and maybe, like I said, I wasn't there, so I'm just reading the press release, so maybe they go into it, but I think there's going to be a whole lot more to it. And I just would hate to see them sort of get flat-footed with this, because they're taking too simplistic of a view, thinking they can simply, right, the classic thing in IT, take the thing that used to work in the past and apply it to the new, and then suddenly wake up 3 years later and go, oh, I guess it doesn't work quite the same way. And that's what I'm a little worried about. But,
Yeah, and I've dealt with this very deeply over the past decade plus as well. Like I worked with telecom expense management 2 decades ago. We were dealing with $50 million annual spend issues and trying to reduce them by 15, 20, 30% as well. And there's a set of strategies that work there. And frankly, they did not translate to cloud FinOps because they are 2 different areas. The products are different, the coding is different, the billing status is different, the contractual issues are different, the tariffs are different from a legal and governance perspective. Like all these reasons that you can't just translate one set of capabilities directly to another. And that could be an all-day workshop right there. But the same issues, I think, are going to apply as you think about cloud going to AI or cloud going to software as a service. Particularly with AI, it is extremely difficult to do any sort of governance on the unit economics of AI. So even something as simple as typing a prompt for an AI request. How many tokens is that? How big is that window? What are my outputs going to be? Am I just going to get a 3-sentence response, or am I going to get 100 PowerPoints and Excel spreadsheets and everything else? Because you can do that now with AI pretty easily with all these newfangled foundation models. That is a trivial thing for many agents and models to do. So you've got to control both the inputs and outputs at a level that we really do not have the governance tools for as of June 2025.
And let's not forget, I mean, it also could be driven by how polite your culture is, because the more pleases they put out there, the more cost it grinds, or the more they're physically, and if you're watching our episodes, this is a test of our history, right? If you're physically threatening your AI systems to get better results, well, what does that do to your costs, right? I mean, there's all these different factors that go into it, and that is what I mean. So, look, I think there's really not a downside, meaning that if anything, I think the risks of AI cost controls, or the lack of AI cost controls, is higher than it was even with cloud, right? So we're sort of, if you talk about your history of progressing, it's gotten progressively, the stakes have gotten progressively higher, the complexity is progressively increased, and AI is just the next evolution of that. And so, look, I think there's probably nobody better suited to help organizations get there. But I just think, if you were listening, if you're a FinOps guy or gal, you better be prepared to step up your game, because I think that this is going to just get tougher and tougher.
There's a new level of variability that can't simply be optimized in the same way that the cloud gets optimized.
Yeah. Exactly. So continuing on the theme, sort of adapting and pivoting and how that all plays. And the big show event that was taking place this week was Snowflake's Summit 2025. And I'm not a big data guy, I'm not a big data guy, and so this is not my core expertise area. So I'll let you sort of chime in. But what I will say this, just on the surface, when I went through everything that they announced, the thing that struck me is that it is indicative of a trend that we've been seeing recently, where we're moving away from the broad, grandiose sort of announcements around AI into much more pragmatic, much more narrow, and I think probably in the end, much more applicable and meaningful uses of AI across all of this. And I think that was my big takeaway, because and this is sort of sounds backwards, because I'm not a big data guy. I looked at this, and most of this sort of went right over my head. It's like, oh, there's all these applications of AI in these very narrow bands that are in the weeds. And so I'm curious your take on how useful and interesting these were from your perspective. But from a macro level, I think that's sort of the state that we're starting to reach.
Yeah, what stood out to me for Snowflake Summit is, so I just talked about how in FinOps, they moved from more ESG based reporting to talking about AI this year. For Snowflake, I feel like last year they talked about all about AI and their Cortex agents and their ability to bring AI to the data. And this year it was really all about very tactical capabilities. So they broadcast capabilities around making their Iceberg data lake more Snowflake ready, working on their data migrations, of course, wanting to suck all that data out of everybody else's platforms and bring them into Snowflake. They broadcast their intelligence product, which is really a business intelligence product driven by natural language, kind of in the same boat as Tableau and Qlik, I would say, as well as building this Cortex AISQL, which is basically using a SQL-like interface for AI. So at the end of the day, the big announcements were about providing business intelligence and a SQL-like capability to negotiate and work with Snowflake's capabilities. Back to the future.
Yeah. Okay. Let's double click on two things. One that you brought up, and one you didn't, and I'm curious on both counts. One is the SQL one. I read that one. I ran through it, and it was like, it was baffling to me. I mean, I understand that SQL is like the language of data, but
I love SQL.
Well, and that's fine. I can write a SQL query as well, probably not as well as an XI, but like I get it. But it's also, there's a whole motion right now, increasingly, especially driven by AI, of moving away from these sort of SQL-based relational driven data structures, because we have to deal with all these different disparate sort of data sources now. And I'm not saying for a minute that that's going away, but I find it interesting that they went down this road of sort of applying AI within the container of SQL versus the other way, which although they sort of did, because they have I forget what they calling it Snowflake's intelligence, which is sort of the other end of it, which is basically this conversational interface to query your data or to talk about your data, which I guess would be bypassing the SQL piece. So it was just really kind of fascinating to me that they sort of attacked it from both angles and are not sort of abandoning or attempting to abandon the whole SQL foundation. So that was the first. I'm curious what your take on that, and then I'll get to the other one in a minute. But just the one you didn't mention was the Snowflake OpenFlow, which I actually found quite fascinating. But what's your take on the SQL? Why the focus there?
My hypothesis, my guess is Snowflake has been finding that AI all by itself is too vague to support the deterministic queries that you want to have in place. But standard SQL isn't open enough to take advantage of the flexibility of AI when you're asking these more open-ended queries. And you need something in the middle that can focus the AI a little bit more from a functional perspective, yet while being more programmatic in nature, something where you can kind of predict what kind of AI capability the the agent in question is going to approach without necessarily having to type it all out. So I see this as a middle ground to be able to guide AI queries and questions a little bit more in a more structured fashion, and perhaps be able to get more deterministic data outputs and
So
inputs.
I don't know. That sounds like maybe if you're not talking to Snowflake from a product marketing perspective, given that that's your path, maybe you should be, because you did such a better job of explaining why that had a place in their product lineup than their press release did. I mean,
I've
that
heard
made
that
perfect
product marketing is a thing, Charlie.
that made perfect sense to me. Okay, I get it. I got it. That works. All right. So the other one that I mentioned, and I'm curious your take on it, was Snowflake OpenFlow, and mostly because it this idea that it's an open, extensible, multimodal, which I think is pretty critical, data ingestion approach. And this is obviously something that they've always been focused on, but really sort of, I think, ratcheting this up into really trying to own this end to end. I mean, what was your take on this? It felt very meaningful, but it also didn't seem to get a ton of airplay on this. So I'm curious if what your read on it was.
Yeah, I saw this as one of several efforts that Snowflake was making to make it easier to bring data into Snowflake. So the combination of OpenFlow, which is data type specific, to basically allow Snowflake to draw data from any specific data type in an undifferentiated fashion. That is obviously going to be very important for Snowflake to bring in more data. And I also thought the Snow Convert AI capability, which brings in data migrations from the likes of Greenplum and Netezza, the old school stuff, is also going to be an important piece of the puzzle. Snowflake is obviously trying to grab as much data as possible because they know they do a fantastic job of working with structured data and supporting those analytics in a performing cost effective from a compute perspective way.
Yeah, so interesting. I think overall good news, particularly if you're a dyed-in-the-wool hardcore data person. I think what the Snowflake is doing is very relevant and meaningful. What is interesting is there's another piece of news, an article this time from the Register, which points out though that even with all of that, they face some headwinds, and those headwinds are not surprising if you've done any work selling into the enterprise at all. But that is that when they started pretty much on digital native companies that really were greenfield, didn't have any legacy to overcome. And so this is I guess at a conference, Jimmy Sexton, their VP of Finance, basically just sort of fessed up to the fact that they're running into issues, not issues as a negative exactly, but that the deal velocity has slowed dramatically, because they're chasing these very large enterprise deals, and these very large enterprise deals, they have to be replacing incumbents. It becomes a replacement motion. And that means that they are sort of beholden to the enterprise buying cycles and when they're coming up for renewals and all that kind of stuff. And it really, to me, the only big, again, if you've sold in an enterprise or if you've been involved in the space at all, that there should be like, duh, there's no big aha there, except for the fact that I think it's a good reminder that when we talk about all of this, AI, big data, any of these elements, that the enterprise moves slowly, right? Often signs multi-year contracts. There's a whole lot of organizational inertia that slows things down. And so, we spend a lot of time on this show, I think in our day jobs, talking about the transformative potential of AI. And that always has to be balanced against the organizational reality of what it takes to adopt this technology and to deploy it at scale and everything that goes into that. And I think this is just an example. Now, mind you, in fairness, they're talking about, seeing these slower cycles on $100 million deals. So, they're not exactly hurting for it, but it was kind of an interesting, I think, view into how things are evolving.
Right. And I think it's also a good reminder that as we're thinking about this AI transformation process, that often we're going to see these conflicts, that a CEO might say, why can't we move to AI faster? And then both the CIO and the CFO have to provide reminders that, oh, we signed a 3-year or 5-year contract with Teradata or IBM or Cloudera or whoever. And because of that, we have to do this XYZ way. We have to do this in the Teradata approved way or the IBM approved way or the Cloudera way. And you heard this new great pitch from, I don't know, Jim Cramer on CNBC from some new company that told you they could do, ABC, but we can't do that because they are asking for us to move all our data to somewhere else first, or they are asking us to take a fundamentally new way approach to structure our data that does not fit with the 25 years of data history that we already have in place in this company.
Yeah. We used to, I don't know if it's still called that. We used to call it data gravity, right? This idea that you had this sort of center that was very difficult in the lift and shift cost way.
It's named as Oracle, and
exactly. But I think what's interesting is there's this double-edged sword around it. I think in the short term, AI can actually help peanut butter across some of that, right? You can connect it to multiple data sources. It can act as a subtraction layer to access data in place and help you gain insights and help you sort of solve for that, some of that. But as you want to scale those efforts, that becomes a drag. And so it's going to sort of drive this. To me, what will be interesting, and I'm betting that it will be positive for them, what I think is actually going to happen as these AI use cases kind of go through that evolution and they start recognizing that there's a drag, these large enterprises are going to now become incented to actually accelerate that motion. And because the other thing that this article doesn't point out, but I think is very real, it's not just the renewal cycle. It's also all of that organizational inertia, the fact that, do I want to make this investment of time and resources and money to move platforms if I can't, is the result going to be really that much more impactful? Because let's not forget, the legacy data vendors aren't sitting idle. They're continuing to make the case that they can be a viable platform. So I think that's another element of it. But I think in the end, Snowflake is going to probably at least have an edge. We'll see. I mean, they have to execute. They have to continue to execute. But I think they have an edge because of where things are evolving to.
Right, but the old pitch doesn't quite work anymore because Teradata does have a cloud product at this point. Cloudera has moved completely from being a Hadoop player to being a next generation data platform. So simply saying you're going to be stuck in the old world by working with Teradata or IBM, it just doesn't work at a time when IBM just bought DataStax and they have HashiCorp and they have their own foundation models. And whatever you want to say about IBM as a legacy player, you can't say they don't have AI pieces that are modern. So, this is more about saying we have been good at staying ahead of the pack, and
it does. I mean, look, I think Snowflake is arguably they're already an anchor player in terms of their size and where they're at now. But what I do think is interesting, I don't remember where I should have brought it forward, but it was this article I read. It talked about creating competitive advantage in this era for software companies. And, the historical standpoint, right, goes back to the Oracle and SAPs of the world where we used to talk about creating moats, right, where you created this data gravity, you created this resistance where it was just so costly to move off your platform, or you had such a defensible technology advantage that people couldn't move. But as you just pointed out, that's becoming increasingly difficult to sustain. And so what is evolving is that the greatest competitive advantage is actually speed, is the ability to move quickly and adapt is becoming the driving force. And this is maybe why I still feel like Snowflake ultimately has the advantage, because despite their size and their relative success in the market, I still think they're moving pretty quickly. So, I guess we'll see how that plays out.
Sure.
All right. Speaking moving quickly, our last piece of sort of news item here is some sort of off the beaten path. I mean, I follow OpenAI's news stuff pretty carefully, and I actually didn't catch this. Our good friend Tom Krazet over at Runtime, it showed up in one of his newsletters, but I otherwise would have completely missed this. And this is that OpenAI sort of quietly made another enterprise push with some announcements. And, I guess I'll call this a half-hearted enterprise push. We talked a lot about OpenAI sort of not wanting to be pinned down, of not having a clear direction in terms of, are they going after the enterprise? Are they ceding that to Anthropic and Microsoft? Are they really trying to be a public? The acquisition of Johnny Ive's company for $6 billion certainly put them down the path of we're competing with Apple with some kind of a device. We don't know what it is yet.
Mm-hmm.
And then they make this announcement, right? And this announcement is, again, fairly quiet, but they introduced a bunch of new connectors for ChatGPT enterprise users that allows you to connect ChatGPT natively to Dropbox, Box, SharePoint, OneDrive, Google Drive, and effectively stick it there in the middle of the enterprise realm of being able to now use ChatGPT as this abstracted interface into your sort of corporate data sources. And not a whole lot of detail and not a whole lot of, how do they solve some of the very challenging enterprise issues around all of that, of doing all of that. But still left me sort of scratching my head. It's like, here, I thought I had you guys figured out. I thought I knew where you're going. And then we get this curveball. I mean, I don't know. So did you even catch this news, and what was your take on it?
I did not catch this before we chatted about this right before the show, but it shows just how OpenAI is now having to promise to be everything to everyone, which makes sense when you raise 11 gazillion billion dollars like they have. Like, they've raised more money than most public companies ever get to see. Like, Informatica, gigantic enterprise company, just got bought for $8 billion, and OpenAI has like 50 billion, 60 billion, like in cash, like committed to them, like, just crazy amounts of numbers and crazy numbers and they have to promise to do everything. They're building data centers with SoftBank. They're building Johnny Ive AI devices. They're trying to take on the consumer space and the enterprise space, which tiny companies like Microsoft can tell you is really hard. Just look at the amount of money they lost on the Xbox year over year. They lost billions of dollars on that, trying to figure out the video game space, because even though a video game console is basically a computer, the consumer space is that different from the enterprise space. And now OpenAI is trying to do it all at once, and it all seems to be centered around Sam Altman, because he doesn't even have great lieutenants for each of these areas. I guess Johnny Ive might be one of the considered lieutenants here, but I don't know who his data center guy is. I don't know who his enterprise workspace guy is. Who is that person who's going to help with this? Because it cannot just be one person heading up all of this.
Yeah, I mean, he has brought on a couple lieutenants recently, and their names are escaping me, but with some decent pedigrees, and so I think that they're going through growing pains, or going through the growing process, I should say. I think where I struggle with this is it feels sort of half-hearted. These are all related to basic data stores, right? So these are not the heavy lift. It's only going to go so far, and not very far at that, in the enterprise space. So it's sort of like a nod, right? They've got this. I think they had this enterprise package, the subscription, and so it's like they have a nod towards it. But I still feel like it's not really clear. And again, what I struggle with is what's the real strategy here, right? I mean, they've got the open APIs. They obviously have the partnership with Microsoft. I mean, in full disclosure, we use the OpenAI via Azure, right? So we use it through Microsoft, and that's one of our core LLMs. So there are 100% absolute enterprise use cases. They're just not in their sweet spot in terms of them delivering them directly. And I'm not sure. So I think if I'm in my CIO hat, it leaves me here sort of scratching my head, going, where do I play? Where do I place my bets? Mm-hmm. And for me, the challenge is that it's just not clear. And so whenever, for me anyway, ambiguity equals uncertainty, and uncertainty equals risk. And so, I look at this and it creates a risk factor. But then again, I don't know that I love betting against them. So, I'm stuck in a bit of a quagmire with it.
Yeah, it's hard to bet against OpenAI, but I just don't feel like this is a best in breed approach at a time when you have to be best in breed for OpenAI to deliver on the promises, basically. Because if OpenAI goes and does all this and they build even $1 billion a year business, that's a failure for them at the amount of money that they've raised.
Yep, interesting. So, all right, let's talk the other end of the spectrum, from brand new kind of, in the last few years, changing the world, to one of the stalwarts in the industry who is trying to shake it up and act like a startup, at least in some ways. And this is, you found this one, and of course, I am chagrined that I missed it because this is right here in my backyard. But IBM is unveiling what they're calling the Watson X. They just refuse to give up the Watson brand, whatever. The Watson X AI Labs here in New York City. And here's what I love about this. I actually think this is brilliant. I've been increasingly becoming a fan of IBM's sort of renewed approach to the market in general, certainly their approach with AI. And the basic idea behind this lab is they're trying to connect and tap into the very, very large and very fast moving AI startup community here in New York City. There are, I believe the number is over 2,000 AI startups here in the heart of the city, all centered in just a couple of very small areas. So that there's just this absolute crush of talent, and they're trying to tap into that. They're trying to be relevant and not by trying to do the traditional big enterprise play that we've seen many players, which is take a big stick and beat everyone over the head with it. But they're trying to ingratiate themselves into this community and listen and engage and provide access to their immense resources to sort of identify and uncover what's coming next, and to sort of code innovate. And I think it's brilliant. So I'm going to rush down there and take a look at the center, and I'm super excited about the fact that they're doing this.
Yeah, so I've been to the One Madison location several times for analyst events, and I think it's both a great location as well as it's a good thing for them to be doing in general. I think one of IBM's problems in recent years is when I go downtown to any of the big tech areas in America, whether it's San Francisco or Boston or Austin, I'm looking for the IBM office and it's not there. Like their Boston office is not actually in Boston. They've got some stuff in Silicon Valley-ish area, but it's not super easy to get to if you're in one of the actual cities. So, but One Madison is definitely the different from all of that. It is right in the middle, in the heart of where everybody is doing the real work in New York City. It's very well located if you are a fintech or a marketing startup to be able to use that space as hopefully a shared space, or to be able to access IBM's considerable resources. And the more that they can open that up and create some sort of ecosystem, the better chance that IBM has to be a real core that can be like an Amazon Web Services, except obviously more AI focused in this case.
Yeah, and I think if you're a tech company right now in the space, you got two ironically very divergent challenges. The first is what I think IBM is trying to solve for here, and that is getting access to the talent, staying connected with this very fast moving space, and figuring out where you need to be going in the market. And so I think this is definitely solving for that. And then the second issue is the fact that I'm reminded how nascent we really still are in this whole evolution. I did a couple of things actually this last week. I did a webinar talking about agentic AI and the impact on the service desk with a bunch of industry leaders. And then I actually spoke at an event sort of with a group that was talking about the brass tacks of agentic AI. And, the nice part is everyone at least knew how to spell AI, but it was very clear that there is still a whole lot of uncertainty and a whole lot of question marks and just barely dabbling with it, even personally. And so it's like you have these two extremes, right? Where it's on the one hand, you have to figure out how to get the talent, how to build those pipelines, how to stay grounded with what's happening. On the other hand, you have a market that is eager and interested and still at the very, very early stages of adoption and needs a ton of education. And I think it's like there's companies that are good at one or the other, and it's really hard to be good at sort of both of those at the same time. So I'm actually super hopeful because I do think this has the potential for IBM to break through some of that. We've talked a lot about in the past some of their challenges with their disparate brands and the lack of cohesion with their different go-to-market motions. And this at least has the potential to sort of smooth some of that over. So I'm hopeful. I'm eager to go see it.
Yeah, we're still at a time where I'm seeing tech influencers with reaches, names deleted to protect them, but basically saying things like, oh, agentic AI is really stupid, but large language models are super smart. Like they don't know what they're talking about because the technology is moving so fast and they're not experts, but they are being asked to provide comments and they have an audience from whatever they did 5 or 10 years ago. Obviously, if they say things like that, they don't know what they're saying, but they say them anyways and they go public with things like that. Just saying that they're even with people who are well known in the tech space, often they don't know the most basic things about how AI is working in the enterprise world. So trying to get to thinking about things like token cost and agentic interactions and interoperability is just far beyond where a lot of people are in tech. This is still very early stage. And of course, if you're listening to this podcast or watching this video on YouTube, you're already ahead of the game. But just be aware that all of this that we talk about on a day-to-day basis that we take for granted is probably something that 95% of the business world doesn't understand, other than to say, oh yeah, I've used AI, therefore I'm an expert.
Exactly. Well, we'll see where it goes. We'll see what happens. But yeah, hey, here's the quiet week. It's a little bit of a shorter episode for us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this, please like, please subscribe, please tell us what you enjoyed and what you're looking forward to hearing on next. And until then, see you next week.